So we have a Sikha today that speaks about the well-known Rambam that talks about the importance of having joy in the fulfillment of a mitzvah, and it's learned, and the Rambam teaches us at the end of the laws of Sukkot, based on a pasuk in our parsha. In our parsha, it speaks about the different Yom Tovim, speaks about the joy of Sukkot, and from there the Rambam derives the idea that we have to be joyous all year round in the service of Hashem. It's a great avodah and so on. Now, the Sikha is a lot of details, a lot of questions and answers. I'm going to be doing an abbreviated version of the Sikha. I'm going to be skipping around a lot. So keep your Beit Lachan and don't lose your hat, because we're going to be doing this in a jumping fashion. Min pasuk is machnu of Hashem alekechem ha'amar b'chag Sukkos, plus b'chag Sukkos, not chug Sukkos. In the pasuk in our parsha that says you shall rejoice before Hashem your God, that says about the Yom Tov of Sukkot, the mitzvah of rejoicing. Lama the Rambam derived shebechag Sukkos ha'is Simcha Yisera Yosem Rishara Moedes. That in the Yom Tov of Sukkot there was a greater joy than all other Yom Tov. Throughout the Sikha, we're going to have a lot of quotes from the Rambam. Here is the quote, first quote from the Rambam. Though all the Yom Tovim, Pesach, Shavuos, etc., there's a mitzvah to rejoice on all Yom Tovim. Chag HaSukkos ha'iseh b'mikdash Yom Simcha Yisera. On Sukkot there was in the Beis HaMikdash a special day of rejoicing. Shenamar of Smachnu L'fnei Hashem Alekechem Shivas Yomim. You shall rejoice before Hashem your God 7 days. There's actually different versions of it. It says Yoim, or it says a different word. Anyway, the case of Hayoisim, how did they make this joy in the Beis HaMikdash? Erev Yom Tov Rishon Hayim Misaknu Mikdash Makom L'Noshim L'Maylo L'Noshim L'Mat. On the eve of the first day of Yom Tov, in other words, before Yom Tov began, they used to prepare in the Mikdash a place for the women above, in other words, a Nezir Snoshim for the women above and for the men below. So that those and those should not mix. They should not mix, the men and the women. And they begin to rejoice at the end of the first day Yom Tov, because in Eretz Yisrael it's only one day Yom Tov, and then the rest days are Chol Hamoed till we get to the last. And so too, every single day of the days of Chol Hamoed, there was extra rejoicing. The fact that the Rambam brings the verse in our parsha, he brings the pasuk of our parsha that you will rejoice before Hashem 7 days as a source for the fact that in the Yom Tov Sukkot there was in the Mikdash a greater joy. Especially since he didn't mention that this has to do with the water libation, Simchas Beis HaShe'eva, the joy of the water home, the drawing home. Kosum Mefarshim Leichiach, the Mefarshim wrote to prove. So Ladas HaRambam, according to the opinion of the Rambam, HaSimcha Yisera in the Shayach L'Nischa Mayim, the extra joy has nothing to do with the water libation. Ella Zeu Chiyuv Min HaTorah L'Simcha Miyuchedes Beis HaMikdash. It's a Torah obligation for a unique joy that was in the Beis HaMikdash. L'Fnei Hashem Alekechem. How do you know it's in the Beis HaMikdash? But it says you should rejoice before, in the presence of Hashem Alekechem, meaning in the place where He's designated for Himself, the Beis HaMikdash. Just tzrichli is b'chag Sukkos Yom Tov. That has to be on the day on the celebration of Sukkot as a Yom Tov. B'noisav l'simcha shetzrichli is b'chol Yom Tov. In addition to the joy that has to be every Yom Tov, you have to be joyous. Sukkot, you have to be extra joyous. V'gam b'chag HaSukkos atzmi b'gvulim. Also in Chag HaSukkos itself, there's an extra simcha in the place of the Beis HaMikdash versus in the boundaries outside the Beis HaMikdash in Eretz Yisrael. We're going to skip over a little bit further. let's go a few pages further where he quotes Oid Kosova Rambam, the Hemshech Dvorov, also the Rambam right. Continuing this mitzvah, laharbis v'simcha zu, it's a mitzvah to increase in this joy. The loyhoyu oisinoisa ame oretz v'chol mishviyirtza, and just the regular hoipoloi did not do this simcha, and not anyone who wanted. El gdoile chachmi Yisrael v'rosha yeshivas v'sanhedrin v'chsidim v'askenim v'anshe ma'isa, the great sages of Yisrael and the heads of yeshivas and the Sanhedrin and the pious ones and the elders and men of good deeds. They were the ones that would dance and clap and play instruments and rejoice in the Beis Hamikdash during the Yom Tov of Sukkot. But the rest of the people, they all came to watch and to hear. And Makir halacha zu, the source of this halacha, the Rambam, is the Mishnah. It's in the Mishnah. It says that the whole story, that Chassidim and men of good deeds, they would be dancing. The Rebbe says we need to understand now, according to what we mentioned earlier. According to the opinion of the Rambam, this joy is a Torah obligation. It was part of the joy of Yom Tov. Skip the parentheses. So why did not the regular people do it? But rather the whole people, the whole populace, the men, the women, all of them came just to see and to hear. So the Rebbe asks, Aleph, first of all, how is it possible, how does it make sense to have fulfillment of a positive commandment in the Torah that says, the Torah says, you should rejoice. It doesn't say only the special people should rejoice. That's something that applies to everybody. Let's skip over further. As I said, got to hold on over here for where we're going to skip. Then bottom further in ice, hey, bottom of the page, left side of it, Oid Kosva Rambam. Additionally, the Rambam writes over there, Hasimcha sheyismach ha'odam ba'asiyas ha'mitzvah, the joy that a person should rejoice in the performance of a mitzvah, u'ba'avas ha'kel, and in the love of Hashem, shetziva b'hem, that He commanded us to do the mitzvahs, avoida g'doili. Oops, didn't turn the page. It's a great service. The chol hamashpil atzmai, whoever makes himself low, mekel gufay, and he like cheapens his body. In other words, he's not concerned about his body. He is joyous, regardless of what the toll it takes on his body. So one should not think that he is in some way lessening his prestige and honor, but rather the more he like cheapens himself and he makes himself low by going over the top in his joy, he is the most honored. Cain David Melch Yisrael Amar, and so David Melch Yisrael said to his wife Michal when she complained about how he's dancing and singing when they brought the Aron into the Beis Hamikdash, when the Kloisi Oidmai Mizois now will become even less than this. In other words, giving even less attention to my honor. By Yisi Shuffle by Einai, and I will be low in my own eyes. So the Rebbe asks, the Tzarech Lahavi, we need to understand, Lama Hevi HaRambam Inyan Zeh Rak B'Hilchos Lulav. Why did the Rambam bring this only in the laws of Lulav, B'Hemshech L'Simcha Yisei the Chag HaSukkos, in continuation of the extra joy of the Yom Tov of Sukkos? This is the general halacha of Simcha. It seemingly is not connected with the excess joy of Sukkot. Even if we want to say the Rambam found one halacha of Simcha, and he wants to combine it with a separate halacha of Simcha. So therefore, There's the Simcha of Sukkot, and then there's the Simcha you have to do with every mitzvah. So he put them together. So the Rebbe says there's another Simcha that we could have put it together. You should have brought it in the laws of Yom Tov. In the Rambam, they are earlier than the laws of Lulav, so he could have brought it already over there. When he spoke about the Simcha of Yom Tov, then he could have said, and you know what? A person has the joy in the fulfillment of a mitzvah is a very big avoid. It makes even more sense to bring it in the laws of Yom Tov. The Simcha Klaus Yaiser in the Simcha of Yom Tov, it speaks about a more general Simcha. So therefore, it makes sense to put the general Simcha of the year and the performance of mitzvahs with the general Simcha of Yom Tov in general. Gimel, the Iker, and the primary question is, when he concludes in the laws of Yom Tov, speaking about Simcha, he speaks about the Simcha in the service of Hashem in general. And the same thing, the Rambam is talking over here about the Simcha, the service of Hashem in general. So therefore, those two places, those two halachas should have been put together. It seems to be, from this indicated, there's a connection between the general joy of a mitzvah and the extra joy that's done on the Yom Tov Sukkot. And that's why the Rambam chooses to teach us the lesson about Simcha Shal Mitzvah in our daily performance of mitzvahs. He does so when he speaks about the excess Yom Simcha, the greater joy, the special type of joy that's in Sukkot. The Rebbe goes on and says, the explanation of all this, Kavonas HaRambam, by bringing the pasuk, it says, you shall rejoice before Hashem your God 7 days. Eina sha'atoira tzivsa kam al chiyuv noisef u'simchas Yom Tov. Hainu achiyuv the simcha yisera b'chag HaSukkos. The Rambam didn't intend to say that there's a special mitzvah in the Torah that tells us, on Sukkot you have an extra obligation of simcha more than the simcha in other Yom Tov. Ella, rather, even shakos of mad yishas achiyuv shel simchas Yom Tov b'chag HaSukkos. The Beis Hamikdash Yosem Shar Yom Tovim, since the pasuk emphasizes the obligation of the joy of Yom Tov in Sukkot in the Beis Hamikdash more so than he does in other Yom Tovim, by stating the following pasuk in our parsha: Smachim Lefnei Hashem Elokeichem Shivas Yomim, you should rejoice before Hashem your God. In other words, in the Beis Hamikdash you should rejoice for 7 days. Though we already know that there's a mitzvah to be rejoicing on Yom Tov and on Sukkot. So since the Torah feels the need to make the special emphasis, this special pasuk that says by Sukkot inspired people that during the 7 days of Sukkot in the Beis Hamikdash, there was an extra simcha. It's not that the pasuk is telling us you need to have an extra simcha, but the fact that the pasuk is just telling us and speaks about the simcha more so than any other Yom Tov, so that inspires people to a greater simcha on Sukkot. Hadavar garam va'oider v'nagu az b'simcha. You say that the matter caused and inspired that on Sukkot they acted in a greater joy, but simchas Yom Tov atzma, within the obligation of simchas Yom Tov itself. Mitzad ha'gosha b'mitzvah klolus the simchas Yom Tov, out of emphasis in the general mitzvah of the joy of a Yom Tov. What the Rebbe is saying over here is that there's no distinct and separate mitzvah of being extra joyous on Sukkot. Not at all. Part of the mitzvah of being joyous on Sukkot is the joy that we have in the base of Migdash. The fact that the Torah emphasized that inspires people to be more joyous than, let's say, on Pesach or on Shavuos. But not that there's an extra mitzvah on Sukkot to be more joyous. Mina Torah, not Torah obligation. Zuka wanted to come. This Rambam says in the next halacha mitzvah harvest the Simcha Zu. The mitzvah is to increase in this mitzvah, in this joy. There's no distinct and separate mitzvah and obligation. It's an increase in this shal simcha, you say it, of an extra simcha. In this mitzvah of the simcha yomtiv itself, there is an emphasis and there is an increase. And then the Ram to explain that that there's a whole question that the Rambam says that this joy does not push away the any mitzvahs or any prohibitions of Yom Tov. The Rebbe explains because it's not an extra mitzvah of Simcha that should push that away. Okay. Now we'll skip over to the next page, to Zion. Pisa move on. According to this, it's understood the question that we asked earlier: how is it possible to be distinctions in the fulfillment of a mitzvah that was given just stam? In other words, to anybody. It says, doesn't say only the elders should rejoice, only the pious ones should rejoice. It just says you should rejoice. So how can you say that there will be differences based on the different categories of Yidden? The Rebbe says, since the extra joy is not an obligation, an independent obligation, that we have now one more mitzvah. There's the mitzvah of being joyous every Yom Tov, and then there's an additional mitzvah to add in joy on Sukkot. No, it's not a separate mitzvah. It's an increase and an extra emphasis in the specialness of the mitzvah of the joy of the Yom Tov Sukkot, because this joy is emphasized more in the pasuk. Therefore, we can understand this is a joy that's dependent upon a person's own particular spiritual level that they are at. So this is not a obligation, that's a Torah obligation that's equal to all, but it has to do with how you are inspired by this to bring to yourself a state of joy. To the degree, how much does he feel the specialness of the mitzvah? And therefore, those that were of a higher stature, a higher level, their joy reached such a state that they would dance and they would clap. But the way the joy was inspired by the rest of the people, men and women, was only to the degree that that was caused by the fact that they came they came to attend, to see, and to hear. According to this, that this extra joy is not a Torah obligation. It's an increase in the positive commandment of mitzvah simchas yomtiv. It's a part of that one mitzvah, that there's one mitzvah asay to rejoice in yomtiv. The amount of increase, the amount of extra that I add to this mitzvah is dependent upon how special this mitzvah felt. Gam also will be understood out. The reason why each one of these categories, the great sages of Yisrael, and through all that he enumerates, the Anshe Maisim and the deeds, would do it. He called each one had an advantage that the other ones didn't have, and therefore a special type of expression of love that they expressed in their extra joy. And the Sikha is going to go on to explain all these different levels and what they represented. We're going to skip over that whole part of the Sikha. Let us go on further. Okay. So now we're going to explain, we're going to skip over to Yud Aleph. That's the second column on the second to last page. Achre calls them, after everything that we explained up till now, how the joy is really part of the expression, the extra joy that was expressed by all these different categories of Yidden. It's all part of the mitzvah of Yom Tov, but the way each person experienced it distinctly. So Achre calls after all of the above. Muban Gamatam also understood the reason. Why does the Rambam explain the advantage and quality of the joy of a mitzvah in general in continuation to the Simcha Beis HaSheva, and he doesn't put it, like we said before, he should have put it where he talks about other mitzvahs of Simcha, for example, Simchas Yom Tov. Why does he specifically connect the Simcha we're supposed to have in the fulfillment of a mitzvah in the middle of Shvat? Does he put it together with the Simchas Beis HaSheva, the Simcha that's the extra Simcha of Yom Tov Sukkos, instead of connecting it with the Simcha, let's say, of Yom Tov in general, that's spoken about earlier in the Rambam? He says, Me'achar Shach Simcha the Simchas Beis HaSheva, Yaisofa b'Simchas Yom Tov, Machmas Chavivus HaMitzvah the Simchas Yom Tov, since the joy of the Simchas Beis HaSheva is an increase. In other words, it's not a different mitzvah, it's just increasing the very mitzvah of Yom Tov, of the joy of Yom Tov. Why are we increasing it? Because of the great specialness that the joy of Yom Tov has to us. Why is it so special? Because the Torah showed that it's special, so that evokes by us a special reaction. This is the content of the idea of how we and why we're supposed to be joyous in mitzvahs in general. The Simcha Shel Mitzvah is not a separate mitzvah, just like the increase in the Simcha on Sukkot is not a new mitzvah, it's just part of the regular mitzvah of Simchas Yom Tov. The same thing, the Simcha of a mitzvah is an extension of and an increase on the main principal part of mitzvah, which is the doing of the mitzvah. In a similar vein, the extra joy that we have on Sukkot is part and parcel of the mitzvah of being joyous on Sukkot. The joy that a person is rejoicing in the performance of the mitzvah, and he's rejoicing in the love of Hashem that he commanded us to do the mitzvah. So in other words, it's part of his performance of the mitzvah. It's not a separate thing. I'm doing a mitzvah and then I have a separate mitzvah to be joyous. No, the mitzvah of being joyous is part of the performance of the mitzvah, just like the extra joy on Sukkot is part of the mitzvah of being joyous in general. When it comes to the simcha of a mitzvah, there's another component which is not found by Sukkot. Simcha shel mitzvah b'chlal yesh chiddush gadol harbe yoser masher b'simchas beis hasheva. In the simcha of mitzvah in general, there is a greater novelty than in the joy of the beis hasheva, the joy on Sukkot. The simchas beis hasheva and the joy of Sukkot, kisha adam shari b'matzav shel simcha b'lav hachi, when a person is anyway in a state of simcha. Surely there is no sadness going on. He's anyway in a state of joy. It's not difficult that if a person is anyway happy because it's Yom Tov, to bring themselves to an increase in joy, to be even more joyous than the regular joy of Yom Tov, because he's already joyous. The joy of a mitzvah in general is demanded in every mitzvah, not just in the mitzvah of Simchas Yom Tov, but any mitzvah I do. And it's demanded not just any time of the year, not just a joyous time of the year, but it's demanded every single day to have the Simcha Shel Mitzvah. B'chol matzav sheyeh, in any state I'm in. Therefore, this joy is considered a great avoida. It's a great service. It needs great devotion and commitment to the Eibishter and his mitzvahs. Now we also can understand why he brings an example of David. Therefore, the Rambam brings an example from David HaMelech that he was dancing and jumping, skipping and hopping before Hashem. Lelamed ad heichan tzricha liyah is to teach us to what degree it has to be a simcha b'chol mitzvahs, the joy in all the mitzvahs. Afal pisha kosha ala adam lahavi atzmer dekach. Even though it's difficult to bring upon the person to bring himself to it. In other words, this wasn't an easy thing for David to like sheepen himself in public and act in such an over-the-top way. Still in all, because of the importance of Simcha Shel Mitzvah, this is what he did. So David HaMelech is an example for us that even though we're dealing with a regular weekday, where we might not be in the mood of being joyous, we might not be in the mood of being happy, but we are performing a mitzvah. The mitzvah might not have anything to do with happiness, but still in all, I'm performing the mitzvah, I have to be joyous. Just like David HaMelech went out of his way to even cheapen the honor of the king to be sameh. According to this, the Rambam is actually doing this from the easier to the more difficult. First, he brings the laws of being joyous on Yom Tov. That's a general halacha, all Yom Tovim. Like we said in the beginning of the Sikha, all Yom Tovim, a person has an obligation to be joyous. The Rambam brings down right away at the beginning of this whole thing, even though all the Yom Tovim is supposed to be joyous. After bringing down the easiest state of Simcha, the Simcha of all the Yom Tovim, he speaks about the Simcha of Yom Tov of Sukkot. That the joy of the Yom Tov of Sukkot is an even more elevated joy. Because now, like we said before, why is there the joy, the excess joy on Sukkot? Because of the special love that we appreciate the mitzvah more so, because it says in the pasuk of Smachim Lefnei Hashem Elokeichem, so that evokes by us a greater joy, each one according to their level. That's a higher level. Then there's even higher than that. And afterwards, the simcha of a mitzvah in general. That's even more difficult, like we said before, on a daily basis when there's no joyous things going on. To anyway be joyous day after day, mitzvah after mitzvah, which is avodah gdoila, a great avodah. So here the Rebbe concludes with a very important lesson. This is also a lesson concerning action. Yachol Yehudi Loimer Beliba Yid could say in his own heart, he could say to himself, this all makes sense in the times of our rejoicing. It makes sense. He had the capability to inspire himself to be in a state of joy. How is it possible that a person could affect himself, that he should be joyous, even after a special time and an auspicious time, days that are meritorious and have within them the spiritual energy for joy? How can I translate this in days that are not in and of themselves seemingly joyous times? It says, this the Rambam says, after we spoke about, after we have the joy of Sukkot, only then begins the great avodah of the joy of a mitzvah. How come? This is Mishum Shetamid, because always I feel even during the weekdays. Call Tenua Yehudi Kshura La'avodas Hashem. Any movement of a Jew is connected with the service of Hashem. Either the person is doing a literal mitzvah, and therefore, obviously, there's going to be joy connected with that. There's an obvious connection with the service of Hashem. Or if they're not actually doing a mitzvah, what they are doing, eating, drinking, working, whatever, it's a detail in what all your actions have to be for the sake of heaven, and all your ways you shall know him. So that's also he's fulfilling a mitzvah. When he's eating, drinking, sleeping, parking his car, whatever it is, that's also part of the mitzvah. So since everything that a person is doing 24/7 is connected with the service of Hashem, therefore the matter has to be done out of joy, like the pasuk says, serve Hashem out of joy. The Rebbe concludes, though the Chazal said, though it says that the Chazal said it's prohibited for a person to fill his mouth with laughter in this time before Mashiach comes. So the Rebbe says that's only mundane laughter. Laughter has nothing to do with Torah mitzvahs. When it comes to the joy of a mitzvah, Adrabah, just the opposite. It's understood that it's obligatory and necessary. The joy that we have in a mitzvah down here below, or not necessarily even a mitzvah, but in all parts of our life, like we said before, that affects the joy and the laughter above. Until it becomes fulfilled, where it says in the pasuk that the one who dwells in heaven will laugh. That he will make fun and laugh at all of those that are desiring to chas v'sholom make problems for the Jewish people. Until we fulfill the promise, then when Mashiach comes, our mouths will be filled with laughter. With the coming of Mashiach that came speedily.
Amen.